Doris Kearns Goodwin is a Pulitzer Prize winner who has written about the Kennedys and the Roosevelts and Lyndon Johnson, among others. But writing about her own childhood and the time in which she grew up allowed her to approach history from a personal point of view. The book is called Wait Till Next Year. We've talked with Doris about this before, and it's out now happily in paperback so more of you can enjoy it. Tell us about your life at the White House. You were a 24-year-old young woman, and all of a sudden you're at the White House as a fellow. Well, first of all, what is a White House fellow?
Well, the embarrassing thing in today's world is to admit that I was a 24-year-old White House intern, which is essentially what the fellowship was. But my relationship wasn't quite as promising as the current Miss Lewinsky's. What happened is I was selected as a White House fellow. We had a dance at the White House. President Johnson did tell me he wanted me to be his personal fellow. But it wasn't to be that simple, because the next day...
His personal fellow.
Well, he meant I would work at the White House.
Gotcha, okay.
But the next day it turned out that an article that I had previously written as an activist in the anti-war movement came out with the title, How to Dump Lyndon Johnson. So that
now, when was this? What year?
This is back in the late 60s,
oh, okay.
you see.
Right.
I'm young.
Yeah.
I'm 24 years old.
Yeah.
And instead of kicking me out of the program, which I thought he would, he just said, oh, bring her down here for a year, and if I can't win her over, no one can. So that's the way
he didn't dump you? I mean, usually, you know, I've heard that he was such a ruthless guy with people who crossed him and didn't think as he did, that if anybody went against him, you were sacked, you were gone.
Absolutely. And he could have even destroyed the entire program because he was so mad. But instead, I went down, and that was the beginning of this peculiar friendship.
Yeah, how did this develop over the years? Because you really became his confidant. He would tell you things. He would confide in you.
I'm not sure I fully understood, to tell you the truth. I mean, at the beginning, I thought it was partly because I was at Harvard, toward which he had a love-hate relationship, partly because I was in the anti-war movement, he wanted to win me over, partly because I was a good listener. He had great stories. Even though half his stories weren't true, they were always entertaining.
Right, right.
But I always worried that it was partly because I was a 24-year-old young woman, and he liked young women, too. But I was great because I kept talking about boyfriends, even when I didn't have them, chattering constantly about them, keeping him at a distance.
Did he ever make a move on you, Doris?
Well, the move was that one day he said he wanted to discuss our relationship, which sounded very ominous, especially when he took me to the nearby lake, which was conveniently called Lake LBJ.
Right.
And then there was wine and a check tablecloth and French bread. And I thought, oh, God, here it comes. And he starts off, he said, Doris, more than any other woman I've ever known. And my heart sank. I thought, this is it. And he said, you remind me of my mother. It was so embarrassing, given what was in my mind. Safe, embarrassed, but safe. It was a great experience. I realize now as an adult what a privilege it was to have spent those last years with him. He was a giant character, no matter what.
Did you ever challenge him in these conversations about his position on Vietnam?
Oh, he expected me to. I mean, that was part of the deal between the two of us. I mean, he would call me Pinko and, you know, anti-war girl. Come, tell me what you think. I'm not sure he ever fully talked to me, though. By that point in his life, he had to believe that the war had been necessary. It was too painful to admit otherwise. So almost fate dictated he do what he did. But we listened to each other, so it was sort of like poking past each other.
Did he ever talk, and this is out of the blue, did he ever talk about when he ran against Barry Goldwater?
Oh, absolutely.
Did he talk about, how do you feel about Goldwater?
Well, you know, the interesting thing is I know when Goldwater died, I read some material about him, and it said that he hated Lyndon Johnson, always. Johnson didn't hate Goldwater. In fact, he was very jealous of him. There used to be, he said, Goldwater had invented a great thing where by his bed he had a button he could press, and the flag of the United States would go outside Goldwater's house. It would go up, and somebody would sing the Star-Spangled Banner, and Johnson said, I want one of those. This is great. He liked the inventiveness of Goldwater, but he was the victor, so he didn't have to be as angry as I think Goldwater was.
Now, and why was Goldwater angry? Because he beat him so bad, Johnson?
No, I think he felt it wasn't a very fair campaign. After all, they had predicted that Goldwater would start a nuclear war, if you remember that ad.
That's right. Remember the girl with the daisies?
It was a kind of dirty campaign. Yeah, in fact, my husband, Richard Goodwin, was part of that creation of that daisy ad. So I think Goldwater forever felt that it hadn't been a fair and it had been a dirty campaign.
And when you were with Johnson through those years, were there ever any rumors in the tabloids or backstage about a romance early?
There were a couple. I mean, just the idea that I was a young girl spending so much time in Texas. And that's where I must say Lady Bird was great. One of these newspapers came out with a story. What is she doing down there? She must be having an affair with him. So the next time I went down to Texas, I felt so embarrassed in front of Lady Bird. She walked across an entire crowded room, took my arm, and she said, I know these journalists just like to spread rumors. I'm not worried. I know you're important to Lyndon. Let me take you to him. And I'll tell you, that was classy.
Yeah,
she was a classy, is a classy woman.
You know, then there were so many things that were the preoccupation of the press. There was the war in Vietnam. There was the civil rights movement, which was in a state of crisis in the mid-60s. I mean, there were far more important things to discuss in the media, including the tabloid media, than whether or not the president was having an affair, as we now dwell on.
You know, that's so true. I look back on that time, and we would stay up at night discussing, will this civil rights bill pass? Will the voting rights? It was exciting. It was thrilling.
Right.
There was Medicare being passed. There was aid to education. It wasn't that we didn't have exciting things. It was far from dull, but it was about real issues that you were debating and getting mad at each other and yelling about instead of all this stuff.
And the overriding debate on the war and its morality or immorality.
Absolutely.
I can remember in my own life having heated arguments, as you say, well into the night about what we were doing in South Vietnam.
And it meant that the great public issues of the day cut into your private life, so you felt larger, you know, even when you were marching against the war.
Now you know, the Cold War is over. Russia's no longer the enemy. We're not fighting with anybody in the world. We have this policy. We love everybody now, including, you know, all the nations. We love India. We love Pakistan, even though they're blowing up on. There's no great passion for conversation about issues because there aren't any issues anymore.
But
I mean, the biggest issue is whether or not we're going to have smoking in bars.
Right.
I mean, really.
But the problem is there are real problems out there
I know.
still. It's not that, but they're not being turned into issues. We got to have somebody that's going to come back and make us do it again, and we got to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
It'll happen again.
We're with Doris Kearns Goodwin. Her book called Wait Till Next Year is out now in paperback, and we'll be right back after this break. With Doris Kearns Goodwin, here is Tanya on the toll-free in Montrose, New York. Hi, Tanya. Welcome to CBS. Hello.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks.
I wanted to ask Miss Kearns Goodwin
Sure.
if Lyndon Johnson ever spoke to her about John F. Kennedy's assassination.
Oh, it's a very good question. He did talk to me about it. I think he thought there was probably something more than Oswald involved. But at the time when he became president, he thought it was so important to bind up the wounds and the worries in the country. If the country felt it had been conspiracy, he thought he'd never be able to become president and get any tranquility, and that's why the Warren Commission mattered to him. I think he thought there was more, though, and it was probably the mafia.
Oh, that's what he thought?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
And Tom,
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to let you know the Jesus picture I saw was orange and it was floating.
That's exactly how it should be.
Oh, okay.
Okay, no, yeah, that's exactly the right way. Thanks, Tanya.
Okay, thanks, Tom.
All right, good night, young lady. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye.
Did Johnson ever... how did you find out he wasn't going to run again, is where I'm going here.
Well, I think what happened, I didn't find out until he said it on television.
Oh,
I started working for him about a week after that. In fact, that's what precipitated it. He said, you said I should be dumped. I've now dumped myself.
Oh,
you
okay.
have to come work for me. I'd been exiled to the Labor Department after this article about him, and then he brought me back to the White House right after he withdrew from the race.
Now, you recently gave a commencement speech at a university. What did you tell the seniors?
Well, basically, that experience of watching Lyndon Johnson at the end of his life, when he had nothing left to live for because he had had work at the center of his life, reminded me of an old saying that Erik Erikson, the great psychologist, had taught when I was at Harvard, that the richest lives somehow require a balance of work, love, and play. And you've got to commit yourself to each of those other spheres, or else you'll be left, as Lyndon Johnson was, not knowing how to get through the days once the presidency was gone. It showed me when I was a young kid that nothing's worth it, even that power, that money, that success, if you don't have other pleasures in your life.
I don't think, as we had this fellow in the other night that wrote this book, you know, on Maury Schwartz, the professor. And Maury said, you know, nobody on their deathbed says, geez, I wish I could work one more day. You know?
Absolutely.
Or I wish I would have had a bigger car. This is not what we talk about when the end is.
But sometimes you wait too long to realize that. And you got to put effort into even loving play. You got to care about something. That's why I'm so glad to be such an irrational baseball fan. At least half the year, I figure when I'm 92 years old, I'll be able to watch baseball games.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the book, and we've talked about this book, Wait Till Next Year, and the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the disappointment that they brought, that they gave their fans year after year, except for 1955. What reaction did you get from people who read that book? Because you talked so much about your childhood. I'm wondering if it brought back childhood to a lot of your readers.
You know, the best part of it has been that there's something about growing up in the 50s that seems very similar for people any part of the country, or even the 60s.
Listen, I was a kid in Milwaukee when the Braves came there in '52. Can I tell you how huge that was?
Oh, I'm sure it was.
When the Dodgers came to Milwaukee to play, and the New York Giants and Leo DeRocher, and he'd walk out to the mound to change a pitcher, and 35,000 people, hop, hop, hop.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, you know, there's also the sense that people remember the first television set that came into the neighborhood, this little 9-inch screen. We would all go to the house and look at it. The polio scares, people remember that. The A-bomb drills where they'd say duck and cover, and somehow you'd get under your flimsy desk and it was going to protect you from this huge atomic bomb. Or the houses being so close to each other that you could run out on the street with a dozen kids your age, family-owned stores on the corner, a drugstore, and a soda shop.
Hardware store.
Yeah, it was a good time to grow up, despite the fact that, you know, politically it may not have been as lively as the 60s was. To be a kid in a neighborhood when you knew everyone on your block, there was something very secure about it.
And very comforting.
And so what's happened is the people who've read it have said, that was my childhood you wrote about, even from different parts of the country,
Sure.
which surprised me. But I realize now how common the elements were.
Oh, same in Milwaukee. As I say, the Braves are the most exciting thing that happened to us as kids. We'd skip school to go and see the Brooklyn Dodgers, to go and see the New York Giants, to see the Pittsburgh Pirates. I mean, you know, it was unbelievable to us.
And we had, during the World Series, they'd be in the afternoon, so you had to figure out ways in school to listen. So the boys would sit in the back with their radios on their lap, and they'd pass a note down every time a home run took place.
Yep.
There was this great moment. We were in Miss Brown's geography class, and she made us memorize every stop on the Trans-Siberian Railway, every product of every country.
Useful information that you can
Well, I can still remember, though. She said, what are the 3 products of Mongolia? And some kid answers, yaks, yurts, and yogurt. And just at that point, a home run was hit. So we passed the notes forward. We all started clapping involuntarily. She says, with this huge smile on her face, I'm so glad you love the 3 products of Mongolia as much as I do. Little did she know it had nothing to do with her. The Dodgers won that year, though.
Yes, they did. Anyway,
exciting.
it's always a joy to see you, and my best to your husband, and thanks for coming on again.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good night, Doris.
Good night to
Doris
you.
Kearns Goodwin is the author, and her book, which is now out in paperback. If you're a child of any decade, you will enjoy reading Wait Till Next Year, and we'll be right back after this short break.